This is a KOAA News 5 special presentation.
All the trees right there burst into flame. I'm in shock.
We could see the enormous plume of smoke. We knew that the fire was right in our neighborhood.
We're watching 3 wildfires right now. The most devastating so far has been in the Black Forest area.
When I got to my driveway, I took one last look and seen that it was right there.
I panicked, threw all the dogs in, and I ran.
We're not sure what's going to happen. We've left our house. We don't know if we're going to get to see our house again.
I ran in and got her because I was scared to death that she didn't get the word.
There was smoke everywhere. It looked like it was nighttime.
Everybody that I know lost their house.
I have my kids and I have my pets. I'm so happy that I have them.
Two fires raging at the same time in southern Colorado, forever changing the lives of the people in those communities. Hello, I'm Rob Quirk.
And I'm Diane Derby. 10 years ago this month, first responders were battling the Black Forest and Royal Gorge fires at the same time.
Now, over the next hour, we'll bring you stories showcasing resiliency, hope, and renewal.
We begin by looking back at the Black Forest fire. At the time, it was the most destructive fire in Colorado's history, destroying 488 homes and burning more than 14,000 acres. This is how the fire unfolded. Tuesday, June 11th, 2013. The first report of a fire in Black Forest comes in after lunch. By nightfall, 6 houses have burned and almost 1,300 families are forced to evacuate. Wednesday, June 12th. The El Paso County Sheriff says the fire is far from under control. The Colorado Army National Guard and U.S. Air Force begin dropping water on the flames. Thursday, June 13th, the sheriff reports 360 homes have burned. 2 people die trying to escape the fire. Friday, June 14th, 379 homes have burned, making this fire the most destructive in Colorado history. Saturday, June 15th, the fire is 55% contained. 483 homes have been destroyed so far. Thursday, June 20th, the Black Forest fire is finally contained 9 days after the initial spark. 488 homes burned. More than 14,000 acres are scorched. 2 people died in the fire.
The combination of wind pushing flames into the thick brush and trees of Black Forest, it was a worst-case wildfire scenario.
News 5's Bill Folsom looks back at firefighting efforts and how first responders were able to contain the flames 9 days later.
Anyone familiar with the thick trees in Black Forest knew there was reason for concern when the wildfire started and quickly grew back in 2013.
Well, it looks like it's spreading. We've left our house. We don't know if we're going to get to see our house again.
10 years later, for many, the fire is more than a memory.
We get bombarded with calls if there's smoke in the area, if there's a fire nearby.
Firefighters want it clear there's still plenty to burn in the area.
The people moving into the district, they don't know what happened. They don't share the same fears as those who lived through it.
We were able to hit the ground a lot more faster and functional because of our experience the year before on Waldo.
Rich Harvey flew in to take over as incident commander when the fire grew to the size and complexity requiring a federal Type 1 incident team. It wasn't on purpose, but he was the incident commander a year earlier at the Waldo Canyon fire.
You know, geographically located, okay, that's where the similarities end.
Black Forest was dealing with homes, businesses, livestock, all integrated into the very thick forest.
It was almost a 2-prong approach. Stop the forward progress, but protect the stuff behind it that was not damaged in the initial passage of the flaming front.
There was an interior threat to homes inside the perimeter.
There was a lot of action behind the flaming front where we had to come in and do the dirty work to mop up, you know, to make sure that nothing that was behind the flaming front was able to take out structures.
Boots on the ground grew to 750. Private, state, and federal air support offered evidence of the massive firefighting effort.
Well, I feel like they brought in the big guns here to stop this fire.
Harvey says aid from Fort Carson soldiers was out of the ordinary for him and welcome.
They're not used to working in our system, but those boys can fly, I will tell you that. And as soon as our guys figured out that if we could describe the mission to them, that they were going to execute it.
The firefight challenges were heavy wind, dry conditions, and very thick, tall trees near hundreds of homes. Add in afternoon thunderstorms that had potential to cause more starts, but also could help.
The advantage of a gusty, erratic wind is that it can push the fire back on itself so that the thunderstorms are fighting against those prevailing winds a little bit.
The strategy was a point-by-point approach, looking for places to take away heat and energy from the flames, one spot at a time.
So you're trying to find places where you can break it up, right? Steal some of its intensity.
9 days after it started, the fire was stopped. In Black Forest, Bill Folsom, News 5.
In the 10 years since the fire, one man has not only helped rebuild the Black Forest Fire Department to be better prepared for any emergency, but he's also rebuilt his own home that was lost in the fire.
News 5's Ira Cronin sat down with the current fire chief on efforts to make sure a tragedy like this never happens again in Black Forest.
I didn't want this job. That's why we joke about me being the accidental fire chief. The chairman of the board had called me and asked if I would just come in for 90 days and do like an operational audit of the department. And I confirmed with him, we're talking 90 days, right? And he said, yeah. Of course, that was 4 years ago.
As you work on preparing, this department, another wildfire in this area, where does that sit on your concern list?
That's always the number one concern. Because of the environment we live in. 2/3 of the community are really similar to the conditions that they were prior to the Black Forest fire.
What is the difference in capabilities versus 10 years ago when you were not, long before you were with this department?
At the time, the department only staffed one firehouse full-time. Now we staff 2 firehouses full-time. So our capabilities have grown considerably. There was 9 employees, 9 firefighters out on the apparatus, and then you had a chief and a deputy chief. We have gone to 24 firefighters, plus a chief and a deputy chief, and a training officer, full-time training officer as well. So that's a vastly different capability. The other aspects we've done is we've brought in a wildland program. We have an additional 2 wildland technicians every day to help us with that capability as well. So you could see where from 10 years ago with that staffing model, we've more than tripled our capability to deal with that.
Much more than just increasing the size and capabilities of the department is the culture change as well as the principles of leadership that Chief Langmaid follows himself, and he expects each and every member of this department to follow as well.
More importantly is the mindset. The expectation is that these men and women are aggressive with problems, which means when they see an issue, it's on them to solve it right then and there. I would rather them default towards being aggressive towards problems than being hesitant.
You've rebuilt a home and now you're rebuilding this department. How far along in the process are you with this department? Where do you want to see it go?
The thing I communicate to people is thinking strategically all the time. Where I want this department to go, I won't even probably live to see. Because my job as the chief executive officer is to be thinking basically the next 1 to 5 decades, where does this organization need to be, and start setting them up for that in the future.
What has been a clear success under the leadership of Chief Langmaid is the growth and the culture change at the department itself as they constantly train for the now with an eye to the future.
For us, it's all about the mission. People often ask for leadership, what's first, the mission or the people? And really, they are the same thing. One side of the coin is the mission and one side is the team. To really get the team focused on the mission, it's as simple as just saying it's about them. It's about the people out there that we serve. And then as you move up in the organization, it's about the people in the organization that are out serving the people. It's always about serving others. That's really what we focus on all of the time.
For News 5, I'm Ira Cronin.
Coming up, 10 years have passed, but one question remains unanswered. What started this fire? We'll take you to where investigators say it sparked and why we may never know what started it.
As we head to a break, here's a clip of News 5 coverage of that Black Forest fire 10 years ago.
We're watching 3 wildfires right now. The most devastating so far has been in the Black Forest area of El Paso County. The evacuation area continues to grow. There is a live look from above and from the ground. That plume of smoke is massive.
As the fire burned through Black Forest, investigators moved into the burn scar to figure out what started it. 10 years later, it's still unsolved.
I went back to the exact area investigators say it sparked to find out why this case is so hard to solve and why no one has ever been charged.
The point of origin would have been in that direction, kind of over the hills.
Former El Paso County Sheriff Terry Makita stands just over the ridge where the Black Forest fire started 10 years ago.
Originally that day the winds were coming out of the southwest, so they were coming from that direction kind of in a pattern this way. And that's what we saw from the aerial photos, is almost a triangle from the point where it started fanning out this way.
As he headed to the command post that day, he could see firefighters rushing to get it out.
It was just kind of eerie, and at that moment the winds hadn't kicked up. You'd get these little breezes and this thick plume of smoke would come through, and it instantly took us back to a year prior, and all I could think about is it can't happen again. Our community hasn't healed, it can't happen again.
I think everyone thought that. The Waldo Canyon fire in Colorado Springs just 1 year before had prepared him and his team for how to respond.
The sheriff, as the statutory fire marshal, is responsible for the coordination for outside assets. You're splitting your resources. Your focus is evacuation, making sure people aren't missing, getting the resources the fire need or security at road closures need. And then you're deploying investigators in to start securing those scenes because you don't want them tampered with.
It was a perfect storm out here. We're having record heat. It's in the 90 degrees.
As the sheriff focused on evacuations, former district attorney Dan May was focused on the investigation. His team quickly started going through the first 911 calls to come in. He says the next day they were able to move into the fire scene. Meanwhile, the U.S. Forest Service took the lead on the investigation. May says 2 independent investigations from the U.S. Forest Service both traced the fire back to the same area. One of those investigations noted, quote, an initial report from a local firefighter suggested the fire originated by a gas meter along Falcon Drive.
Quite frankly, it just didn't seem as credible, and we had 2 different very qualified teams eliminate that.
This shows we're at the exact latitude and longitude where the fire started.
That's correct. And so the smallest they could get it was about 17 feet by about 30 feet.
The former DA says they couldn't find the exact spot the fire started because they believe the fire burned through this area twice, destroying all evidence in its path. The proof? Burned fire hoses like these, still here 10 years later. He says the first crews who responded said they didn't leave any behind, suggesting there was another crew that came in for a later firefight.
So there's literally no trace.
Correct.
No trace at all.
When the task force comes to me and says, Dan, the cause of the fire can't be determined, here are our best possibilities, but we don't know. We're all in together on, okay, there's nobody we can charge here right now.
Because the public would say, we want to hold someone accountable.
Public, believe me, the task force on this case, my office, the sheriff's office, the Forest Service, all the forest agencies involved in this case wanted to resolve this, wanted to find out what happened, wanted to hold somebody accountable. And if we could do that today, we would.
May says the Forest Service narrowed the fire down to 3 possible causes.
They found that it could be incinerate, meaning that someone could have just used a match or a lighter or something like that, not an incendiary device, but just, they could have used a match. The second thing they come up with is equipment. There's a lot of equipment in the area. They're cutting, there's actually mitigation work going on, there's different vehicles. Some of it complied with the Forest Service standards, some did not, and they say that's a possibility. The third is what they call debris, and specifically we had someone here who had a chimney, was doing some work, and as they're burning stuff, they didn't have the right equipment on top of the chimney to stop ash from flying, and it is possible that the ash flew into that area and also started the fire. But you don't know, we don't know on this one.
Complicating the case even more, uncertainty about which day it started.
So now you open up even more possibilities. Could someone have just walked through the area and done something that they weren't even aware of? So now we've got 2 days to cover, and they said it's almost equally plausible that it started on either day. That particular report even goes on to say it could have been even a day before that. We've seen fires like that, but we didn't really study for that.
And then there was the horrific discovery of 2 lives lost. 52-year-old Mark Herklotz and his 50-year-old wife, Robin.
The people were found dead, then it's now a criminal scene with potential homicide charges.
The couple died as they got ready to evacuate.
The evidence would suggest they kept going back and forth, putting stuff in their car, because there's a whole bunch of weapons in particular, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in their car.
And without a specific cause, there's no one to hold accountable.
I can understand the frustration. I mean, it was just devastating here to all the people who lived here. We had 2 people who died. We lost 488 homes. It was just devastating to this community, and they ought to know what happened. But in this case, we just can't tell.
How much did that weigh on you as the DA?
A lot. I mean, I was out here quite a few times. It's one of those things you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. Sometimes I go back and look at their photographs, look at the evidence myself to see what I can determine.
Do you think it will always stay unsolved?
Probably. You'd almost have to have somebody know they did it and come forward and say, here's what I did.
You'd need a confession.
Yeah.
In the meantime, the former sheriff with an important reminder to the community of just how easily a fire like this one here can happen again.
Although to a lot of people that have moved here, this is history. It's something that happened long ago. It can't happen again. It could happen anytime, any year under, the basic weather conditions. It can happen, and all it takes is one careless act.
And it can be deadly.
Exactly.
2 people who lost their lives in this fire were loved by many. They were parents, friends, and neighbors. Their memory lives on to this day.
As we head to a break, let's pause for a moment of silence as we reflect on this community's loss.
The big question for people to answer after such a devastating fire is, what's next? For some, the answer is clear. This is their home, and rebuilding is the next step to heal.
News 5's Allison Zimmerman shares a couple of homeowners' experience and their decision to rebuild.
After having been through it, there's a long, hard road ahead.
Where we call home is a sanctuary of sorts.
You hear the frogs.
That's especially true for people in Black Forest. And for the years leading up to the fire, it lived up to its name. A true forest offering some stillness from the busyness of the city.
This section over here probably had maybe 500 trees.
What's it like looking at it now?
Well, pretty bare, but I keep planting trees.
I'm a survivor of the Black Forest wildfire, which happened on June 11th, 2013.
Laura Lawler remembers that day clearly. She has reminders of the fire in her home.
That day it was surreal. It was like we were waiting for news to come through. A couple hours went by and we still hadn't gotten any evacuation orders. So I started packing.
A friend of hers knocked on her door and told her it was time to leave. She packed up a suitcase and some valuables, but couldn't find her cats.
I said to my friend, do you think if we leave enough food and water for the cats, they'll be okay? And he looked at me just horrified and he said, are you crazy? He said, you may not have this house to come back to later on.
She found the cats and made her way to her parents' home in the Springs.
So when we got to my mom and dad's house, I walked in with my little rollerboard suitcase, and jokingly I said to her, well, this might be the only things we have left in this world. And she said I was being overdramatic at that point. So,
as it turned out, she wasn't. For days, she would watch local news for any sign of what may have happened.
It felt like you were just waiting for the other shoe to drop. You didn't know one way or the other, which was a very unsettling feeling.
She'd find out through property records her historic log cabin was gone.
As you can see, it was a little old log cabin, 900 square feet. It was weird. It was like looking at somebody else's house.
It wasn't until she went and looked at her brother's home, something caught her eye.
But then we walked past a rabbit, and the rabbit had been like frozen in mid-step, and it was standing straight up. And all I could think of was the last few minutes of this rabbit's life, the last few seconds. It looked like it had been flash frozen. That's when it got to me. Oh, I love Black Forest. I wouldn't consider living anywhere else.
The decision to rebuild was a simple one. She now has more space in her physical home and outside.
It's barren. It's great to know you've got neighbors, but I miss having the trees around us.
But all of those dead trees from the road back are just sort of a grim reminder that once we were in the middle of the forest and now we're not.
Carolyn Brown doesn't dwell on what happened 10 years ago. Her home burned down, as did many to the north of her. Her other neighbors had minimal damage.
But the neighbors were saying, boy, I wish my house had burned so I could have a new house. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't think you really want that. You know, the lure of a brand new house is nice, but no, it was a major inconvenience.
Brown was working on a stained glass project in her basement when her phone just kept ringing.
Phone calls kept coming from all my friends, and they said, there's a fire, you better get prepared.
She really couldn't see much from her home, so she decided to take a drive.
And so I thought, well, I'll go down Shoup and stop at the park, and you could see those houses. One would go up in smoke, and it would just be like a little spire.
Eventually, she saw the flames traveling closer.
The fire was just orange on the other side of the road. So I think I almost waited too late.
She packed up her animals and some important papers and left. She figured as she was leaving, she would not have a home to return to. The path of the fire still confuses her to this day.
Fires are weird. I don't know. I wasn't here, so I don't know what happened, but this house is new. The old one burned to the ground.
Reminders of what was still exist. Tree stumps and burned limbs. But Brown's rebuilding story was quick. She was back on her property within a year of the fire.
I just felt that if I wanted to get my life back, I needed to be proactive and get things back in order.
While she didn't take much with her, it's not something she regrets at all to this day.
To me, things are just things. You can replace almost all stuff.
Coming up in our special 10 years after the fire, plant regrowth in Black Forest, it remains slow.
How the flames damaged the soil for years to come, and what it will take for this beautiful forest to fully recover when we return.
Burning for 9 long days, the Black Forest fire left more than 14,000 acres of scorched earth in its wake. Still, to this day, remnants of the fire can be seen for miles throughout Black Forest.
But 10 years after the flames were put out, new growth seems hard to come by. Meteorologist Alan Rose takes us back to the burn scar to find out why.
Here at the Pineries Open Space, the Black Forest fire burn scar serves as a clear reminder of the massive blaze that lit up this area 10 years ago.
It's incredible to see, on the one hand, fire is, of course, a very natural part, of forest ecosystems, especially out here in the West.
That's the reaction of service hydrologist Justin Lewin with the National Weather Service in Pueblo. It's his first time seeing the burn scar in person. The destructive blaze of 2013 has redefined the landscape here.
Following a wildfire, typically, it usually at the very least takes a couple of years to have, some meaningful vegetative regrowth.
But when it comes to new growth, it's the soil that also plays a prominent role.
Overall, in a post-wildfire landscape and environment, there are tremendous impacts to the soil. It's just a complete night and day difference.
When a fire burns with such high intensity as the Black Forest fire did, the topsoil often becomes waxy. Called a hydrophobic layer, it can severely stunt new growth.
Those hydrophobic kind of soil conditions, they can last for years, again, kind of depending on the intensity of the fire itself and how just hot, everything burned.
The hydrophobic layer can prevent water from reaching the soil beneath the surface, as water runoff rates will be higher. More runoff and less absorption into the soil will in turn have a direct impact on how quickly the forest recovers.
In the best case scenario, if we do start getting some decent regrowth, the root systems will inevitably help sort of break up, that kind of hard hydrophobic kind of layer, and it'll help reestablish the structure of the soil too.
As for the future of the burn scar, recovery is a slow process, but there are signs of progress.
There is a lot of green on the ground, which is always, better than nothing, certainly, a lot of grasses. And, I am seeing, some young saplings too.
Coming up, we're traveling south to the Royal Gorge. The fire may have destroyed their livelihoods, but the people of Fremont County were determined to recover.
After the break, we take a look back at the Royal Gorge fire and how the park was rebuilt to be better than ever.
This is a dynamic situation, changing with this wind pushing this fire still out of control.
DC-10 dropped slurry on a ridge behind us, and it stopped the fire from heading our way.
That just takes the spark like you're talking about, and suddenly, like we're looking at right now, you got flames, going several hundred feet into the air.
With these winds, it was just seconds.
We got to get in there and put that fire out.
The smoke is let up enough now. You can see the Royal Gorge Bridge and where this fire has burned through.
It's been a tough 3 or 4 days, watching the park burn.
We're tough, we're resilient, we come back.
This town loves them, and just thanks them for everything that they've done.
If they're going to go out there and risk their lives, then I can come out here and show my support.
It's a fire that burned thousands of acres, destroying most of this iconic Royal Gorge Park. It's a critical component of Canyon City's economy. Welcome back. I'm Rob Quirk.
And I'm Diane Derby. The almost 1,300-foot-long bridge still stands 10 years later. It miraculously withstood the flames, only losing around 30 of its wooden planks.
Now, the park rebounded, so within about 14 months of the fire, and now hosts more than 350,000 people every year from all over the world. But how did we get here? Let's look back at how the fire actually unfolded 10 years ago. Tuesday, June 11th, 2013. A fire is reported on the south side of the Royal Gorge Bridge after lunch. 1,600 people forced to leave the park. Surrounding areas are also evacuated. Wednesday, June 12th, Governor John Hickenlooper declares a disaster emergency for the Royal Gorge area. The fire, 20% contained. Thursday, June 13th, evacuations are lifted. Fremont County Commissioners issue a disaster declaration. Sunday, June 16th, crews declare the fire 100% contained. No homes are destroyed, no injuries reported. January 31st, 2014, officials break ground and work begins to rebuild the Royal Gorge Park. February 28th, 2014, Canyon City Police conclude their investigation. Officials say the fire was likely human-caused. Labor Day 2014, the park officially reopens with brand new gondolas and a more than 14,000 square foot visitor center.
Rob, it's amazing to think that 10 years ago, both the Black Forest fire and the fire here at the Royal Gorge Park were burning at the same time.
Yeah, the Royal Gorge fire was as devastating to this part of southern Colorado as the Black Forest fire was to northern El Paso County. The park here was declared a total loss. The wide-ranging economic impact, well, just as devastating. The question was, could it be rebuilt? How quickly? Because the economic vitality of an entire region was at stake.
I can't believe it's been 10 years, to be honest. That's the biggest takeaway.
I consider today like looking in the rearview mirror. I don't hardly remember the old park. This is the new park to me.
But you can't talk about today without looking back to June 13th, 2013. The day the park literally burned to the ground. Scorched earth is not an overstatement. The charred remains of a horse from a carousel. A moment frozen in time, a look of disbelief, shock at what remains of an iconic southern Colorado tourist attraction. It's an apt description for employees that day. It was a Thursday, just after noon.
The fire jumped the gorge. So that's when we all got serious about booking out of here. So we had to get about 1,200 people out of here, within a very short amount of time.
Peggy Gare was working in the park that day. She says they'd seen fires before, but this was different, much different.
And I thought, wow, this looks bad. I never realized that by evening time this place would be just totally ashes.
Now, when you talk about the devastation here at the park, it was significant. 48 of the 52 structures on this site destroyed. When you talk about the bridge, relatively speaking, it was much less. So the priority was, let's get the bridge repaired, also rebuild the visitor center. That is the core of this park, to get the business itself up and running as quickly as possible.
We had to rebuild the entire park from scratch. and we had to do it fast because the city, this region, they need us.
Quick is a relative term when you must redesign and rebuild a nearly 100-year-old park. It took 7 months of demolition alone, but during that time, the owners, the architects, and the staff were putting their heads together to see what kind of park would literally rise out of these ashes.
At that time, it was like, okay, everybody get your wish list together, and we're going to start rebuilding this park.
It was all hands on deck. Contractors, of course, heading up the demolition, architecture, reconstruction, but employees themselves were pitching in as much as they could.
So the minute I heard, yes, from our owner, we are going to rebuild. I mean, the employees were euphoric. And then it was just a matter, we hit the ground running. This place is so important to the people of the area, to employees. So I thought we worked pretty fast.
Can you say getting your hands dirty to help the cause?
One of our maintenance guys, I was up here one day taking a look at everything, and he came up and had to reintroduce himself because I couldn't recognize him. He had just soot all over him.
Members of the community also joined the effort. Their livelihood depended on it. So much so, the actual destruction of the park from the wildfire and the frantic effort to rebuild actually became a tourist attraction in the middle of a construction zone.
For that, we were even having tours coming up because the city and the community was like, what can we do to get people to come down here for the local businesses? And so we were doing tours where we would just have buses coming through to see some of the destruction through the area. We'd have buses coming through all day while we were doing construction and demo and all that.
Of course, a common question from tourists throughout this process, so when are you going to reopen? Amazingly, 14 months after the fire, a soft opening, if you will, a newly reconfigured park as construction continued. A more streamlined operation, from 52 buildings to 10. Just the theater is still in use post-fire. New gondolas were installed, a zip line installed, more educational programs, more reminiscent of a national park now.
We had all of these outlying attractions and food areas and merchandise areas. So we were spread all over this 360-acre park. We've become very efficient now. People are still able to enjoy the Gorge. Instead of 5 restaurants, we have 2 really great restaurants. So it's just worked really well.
Nearly 2 years after the fire, May of 2015, a grand reopening for the park, a $30 million rebuild, all paid for with insurance money. 10 years later, there are 30 full-time employees here, and number jumps to around 150 during the busy tourist season. While the images of that devastating fire are still firmly etched in the minds of those who lived through this, there's no question a sense of pride and accomplishment to see what the park has become. One that's more dynamic, managed and run much better, I'm told. An iconic landmark that even Mother Nature could not destroy.
So this place has a different look, but the Gorge never changes. And that really was to our advantage.
We used to take it for granted a little bit, and we really don't anymore. We know how special this place is to not only our staff and our team, but to Kansas City as well and the residents.
While scars remain, part of the rebuild is actually the rebirth of the natural landscape here at the park, replanting trees and grasses that were destroyed. And thanks to the handiwork of staff here at the park and the Kansas City community, you can see the regrowth beginning as you drive into the park and into the bridge area. But another 20 or 30 years from now, perhaps reflection of what was before a fast-moving wildfire burned so much to the ground.
A specially trained crew based out of Canyon City could help prevent future wildfires from being as destructive as the Royal Gorge fire. It's called Helitack. The crews are made up of firefighters who were quickly taken by helicopter to wildfires. This improves response times and could stop the flames from getting too out of hand. The helicopters also allow firefighters to access remote locations in the mountains.
And this training is really bringing us together to shorten that amount of time that we are in that So, quote unquote, danger zone.
Helitack crews can land near the fire or rappel from a hovering helicopter. On the ground, crews can begin to build fire lines using hand tools, chainsaws, and other firefighting tools.
Many families here in Fremont County rely on the Royal Gorge Park to put food on the table. Coming up, the toll this fire took on the local economy, how small businesses managed to keep going once the tourists were gone.
And as we head to break, here's a clip of News 5 coverage of the Royal Gorge fire 10 years ago.
This is the same area we were looking before. You see that big black plume of smoke, but right in front of it, the smoke let up enough now. You can see the Royal Gorge Bridge and where this fire has burned through. It started over here, came across from the south, and the Royal Gorge Bridge, that fire was on that side, and right there around the Royal Gorge Bridge, it has jumped.
The Royal Gorge Bridge and Park is one of the largest attractions in southern Colorado. It brings more than 350,000 visitors to Fremont County every year.
But when the fire destroyed the park, local businesses that rely on those tourists were suddenly left without customers. News 5's Andy Cohen explains the fire's impact on the Royal Gorge region's economy and how these business owners kept their doors open.
At Colorado Jeep Tours,
everybody wants to go for a ride in a Jeep.
Guests can experience Fremont County in a unique way.
We take people out on interpretive scenic tours.
Owner Will Colin had just launched this business a few months before the fire broke out.
And I can remember standing in the parking lot and watching the plume of smoke come up over the mountain and just thinking about the summer, oh, where's it going to go from here?
And he wasn't alone, feeling overwhelmed.
You do have to pause for a moment and actually try and digest everything that's going on and realize, my goodness, everything I've worked for my entire life could be a loss in a matter of moments.
Andy Nines owns Echo Canyon River Expeditions. He watched in awe as the fire burned right across Highway 50.
I really did sleep out front of my organization here, and I watched the Royal Gorge Bridge and Park burn to the ground.
Tourism generates around $72 million a year in the Royal Gorge region, and the Bridge and Park is the biggest attraction, drawing an estimated 350,000 annual visitors at the time.
We had to evacuate about 1,200 guests and 200 employees.
Mike Bandera led the park through the disaster and subsequent rebuild. He said they emptied the facility in 45 minutes. A half hour later, almost everything was gone.
It ended up burning, well, 48 out of the 52 buildings, to the ground.
There was a group of firefighters who was at the bridge actually wetting the planks down, trying desperately to keep them from catching on fire. And we heard the call come in, we can no longer defend. We are withdrawing. And it was just, it truly was, it still gives me goosebumps. I mean, it was absolutely heartbreaking.
Fortunately, the bridge was spared, although some planks burned and had to be replaced. Local leaders were on site and signed a major disaster declaration that day.
And we got that going so that any kind of help that might be available, financial help would be available.
The planning had already started by the end of that day.
Step one was demolition.
The loss of the aerial tram at the Royal Gorge Bridge and Park resulted in the cable falling down from the canyon rim into the river. So obviously there was a safety hazard there,
blocking the path of the trains and the rafts. The summer of 2013 was difficult. A study later estimated the tourism revenue fell about 15%. The Bridge and Park laid off 190 of its employees. At Echo Canyon, the phone rang constantly with guests canceling their rafting trips. Nines, Colin, and the other business owners found strength in each other.
Even though we're competitors, we're still friends.
It's good to have friends at a point like that because you really do feel as though you're all alone having to make some very difficult decisions.
And guests did return later that summer, curious to see the scope of the damage.
Black waterfalls coming off of the Royal Gorge. The river ran a very interesting color there for a little while.
I had so many people calling us that wanted to see the destruction, that we wanted to see the burn scar. It's history.
An insurance policy covered most of the $30 million that it cost to rebuild the park. The contractor was also the architect, designing and building at the same time. City and county officials worked hand in hand to expedite permits and inspections.
We all came together, we had weekly meetings, made the decisions quick, stuck with those decisions, and kept things moving.
And Memorial Day weekend 2015, just 2 years after the fire, the park officially reopened.
After we opened, record-breaking attendance every year up until COVID.
We really needed to come together, and I think we did a fabulous job of that. I'm so proud of my community, I can't even tell you.
As cliche as it really is a Phoenix Rising story. It truly is.
In Fremont County, Andy Cohen, News 5.
A Canyon City author is doing her part in preserving the history of the Royal Gorge Bridge and Park by writing a new book. Now, this isn't Eve Nagaty's first time putting pen to paper. In 2014, she released a book exclusively on the Royal Gorge fire. This time around, she's focusing on the entire history of the park, and it includes how it rose from the ashes after the fire.
As I started interviewing people, I began to realize that you can't look at the devastation of a fire without first understanding what was there before and how important it was.
She says she's been researching and writing for almost a decade, and she expects to release the book sometime next year.
Coming up, we're going back to Black Forest. The fire may have destroyed their homes, but the spirit of the people, it withstood those flames.
How the Black Forest community rallied to rebuild their homes and their lives. We'll be right back. In the days following the Black Forest fire, hundreds of volunteers rushed to this community to assist in cleanup efforts.
These helpers provided moments of encouragement during this really tough time, moments people here in Black Forest will never forget. News 5's Patrick Nelson shows us how the community support was so important during this disaster and the days that followed.
It's a little amazing to me now that it's still affecting me as much as it is. It's kind of surprising me that it's been 10 years.
Terry Hayes says when she saw the smoke near her home in Black Forest a decade ago, she knew it would be bad.
It was just so overwhelming how big that fire plume was and that smoke plume that it is forever ingrained into my mind.
But another lasting memory is the community support and that she wasn't alone when she had to evacuate her home.
I had some very good friends that didn't even call me. They just showed up at my house. And helped load me up and just said, let us go. And it was tough.
As the fire burned quickly across the landscape, scorching homes in its path, Terry says the fire, thankfully, was stopped just a quarter mile from her home.
We decided we had to do something. We went and made some banners that said, thank you, firefighters. And we went to where they were staging and just said, thank you for saving our house.
It would have taken our church out had the wind not moved more to the northeast.
Bob Bender remembers the heart-wrenching moments working as a chaplain alongside Black Forest firefighters and assisting the community during the fire.
The Black Forest fire is indelibly impressed in the psyche of our people, of our community, and of our church, and forever it will be.
Pastoring his church through the fire, Dr. Bender says many people came here for help, but at one point, even the church had to be evacuated. But he says in the following days, he was blown away by the national response to help those who had lost everything.
What occurred was just amazing. We had 1,000 volunteers over a 10-week period come into our church, about 100 a week. Our church became HQ for going into these homes and sifting and offering hope and healing and help to those who lost their homes.
Now, a decade later, Dr. Bender says it's a blessing to reflect on the resilience of the Black Forest community.
Slowly, slowly, we recover and we rebuild and we renew and we reflect and we move forward with our lives in a way, hopefully, that makes us stronger.
Months after the fire, first responders were honored in a parade in Monument, an important moment for the community.
And the amount of people that came out was incredible. It is by far one of the most special memories I have.
And an important show of support for the first responders who worked day and night during the disaster.
The thing that I remember most was the look on their faces, just to know somebody thanked them. Somebody cared. Somebody did the best they could to show appreciation. Can't do too much of that.
As we head to break, we're going into the vault as we look back at News 5 coverage of the Black Forest fire 10 years ago.
We'll be right back.
This is what we were able to see earlier this afternoon, just a few hours ago. Homes like this one going up in flames. And the scary part about it is some of these homes, you were seeing the land around them, the trees hadn't burned, but the home was burning.
Time now for some final thoughts, having worked on the anchor desk day after day, 12-hour shifts at a time during that period 10 years ago. Well, a decade has passed, but the loss, the sacrifice, the courage, the resilience, it's never gone away. The fact that we were dealing with two massive wildfires simultaneously reflects just how vulnerable we would become because of development within the expanse of our wildland and the massive amount of resources it would take to finally contain them. Thoughts of all these men and women on the fire line, literally trying to protect our livelihood while putting their own lives at risk. Those disturbing images day in and day out of the mass destruction that at times couldn't be contained. Home after home in Black Forest, up in flames, 2 lives lost, and nearly 100 years of history at the Royal Gorge, gone in an instant. But we survived, we've rebuilt, and of course, lessons learned, we hope. Most important of which, if we don't learn from our past, improve upon our Firewise IQ, we're destined to repeat it.
Well said, Rob. There are still plenty more stories to tell here in Black Forest and the Royal Gorge. Our team of News 5 journalists have put together a list of stories you may find online by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. You'll be able to rewatch the stories in this special and catch some you may have missed.
Thank you so much for joining us for this News 5 special presentation.